Good morning, everybody. Today's meeting is being filmed for live and subsequent broadcast by way of the Council's internet site. The images and sound recordings may also be used for training purposes within the Council. Members dialing in remotely, please only turn on your camera when you wish to speak, and please remember to switch it off when you've finished. Also, could you ensure that you refrain from using any mobile devices during the committee and that any devices are on silent? Okay. Do we have any apologies this morning? No, yes. Any declarations of interest? Okay. So we'll go down to the minutes of the 27th of January, which start on page 3. Pages 3 to 8. Let's quickly go through those from page 3. Page 4. Five. Six.
Sorry, Chair. Yeah. On page 5, where we're at the top of the page to summarise, says 3 meetings per year which we retain, which we supported, and administration. And the third meeting, they were only going to provide looking for the meetings, no administration is what I believe this has. But whilst the senior officers won't be available, I thought we were going to get administration for those third meetings.
No, they've never agreed we'd have administration. They would help us with the booking of the rooms and the advertising of the meetings, but that would be as far as it would go. There'd be nothing else there, unless there was a specific issue that you wish the council officer to attend for, which, if they could, they would.
Okay.
Yeah, did everybody get with that? So page 6. Page 7. Somebody to move the minutes. Okay, second. Okay, so we've got the voter ID.
Morning committee. So this is a presentation update and information and needs-based update for the committee based on feedback from some of the things you wanted to look at in the last meeting. So the Elections Act 2022 received royal assent in April last year. The Department of Levelling Up Housing and Communities are still working through the policy and releasing some of the secondary legislation as it's developed. So whilst there's a few things on the list that we're going to talk about today, really we're going to focus on voter identification with a view that perhaps we can come back to the committee later in the year to talk about some of the other changes that this will bring in. Please. So the bill impacts the administration of electoral registrations and elections, and there are a number of practical arrangements that the council must consider in readiness for implementing these changes. There are a few significant changes that will look to do some forward planning and change to our operations in order to meet those legislative requirements. So the key elements under the Act are voters are required to show photo ID at polling stations before a ballot paper is issued. Electoral registration officers based in local authorities are to issue free electoral ID certificates or documentations. So these are commonly called voter authority certificates or VAC, and these must be provided free of charge to eligible electors who apply for one. The Act also requires postal voters to reapply for a postal vote every 3 years. So whereas the previous refresh on a signature would be every 5 years, it would be 3 years. As I say, that comes into pass later in the year. And there are some changes then on the handling of postal votes, how many an individual can handle at a polling station. There are some few changes around extending accessibility measures to voters in stations too, and polling stations. And then there are some changes around voting and candidacy arrangements for EU voters and British citizens living overseas. So as I say, there's a lot to consider here, and there is a lot of information. So today we're going to focus on the voter ID side of it, and if the committee wishes, we'll certainly come back to another session to talk through some of the other changes. So the government states that requiring voters to show some form of ID will reduce the risk of voter fraud and improve the integrity of the electoral process, and that showing ID will stop people from being able to pretend to be somebody else at the polling station. So in terms of electoral offences, that is an offence known as personation. The proposals don't have implications for any other types of electoral fraud, such as those related to postal votes or campaign expenses. And there are some key facts and figures there on the link that I've shared that shows the information. Also must be noted that critics have argued that the requirement will make it more difficult for people to vote and may disproportionately affect some marginal groups. But we'll go into how we look at that in a bit more detail towards the end of the presentation. So the introduction of voter ID, you may or may not be aware that this actually went live on the 16th of January this year. So there are some elections that this applies to and some that it does not in Wales. In Wales, there are some elements of electoral administration that devolved. So we are beginning to see some divergence in UK-wide elections and Wales-only elections. So from the 4th of May, you must have voter ID to vote in UK parliamentary elections, Police and Crime Commissioner elections, and then the difference being you only need a voter ID to vote in locals for England, but not in Wales. And then from the 5th of October, UK parliamentary general elections will also be included in this. So we know in England, although we don't have any polls this year, we did our locals last year in England, they have got local polls coming up in May. So they're really the first people that will go through this experience, and this is why the portal's already gone live. So there are some accepted forms of voter ID that people will already be in possession of, or some people will. So there are 23 accepted forms. This includes things like passports, driving licenses with photographs, accredited cards, and even expired passports. Driving licence will be accepted as long as they still have a good likeness of the person that is seeking to vote. There's also, as I say, the free voter ID or the VAC available from the ERO, which we'll go into in a little bit more detail. From the recent pilots that they did last year, in terms of people applying for ID, it is difficult to predict how many people in the demographic are going to need the photographic ID. From the studies, from the pilots, it looks like it will be 5%, but I think that's still to be, measured in practical terms, and we will be able to learn a little bit from the England polls that will help us prep up for when we need to introduce this. I think there was some quoted research shared by the Department of Housing and Communities that showed that 99% of those aged 18 to 29 held an accepted form of photo ID, and 98% of those aged over 70 held an accepted form of photographic ID. Whilst those who have a form of ID can use that to vote, they can still apply for a free voter ID as well. It's not an either or. So then a little bit more on accepted forms of voter ID. So along with those passports and driving licence, some travel passes, such as bus passes for over 60s, will be accepted. Biometric immigration papers, and this is really helpful in terms of people who may only need to keep what they already have to vote. And it's worth noting that not all travel passes can be used. It depends on the level of verification that underpins that travel pass. So I think when we're looking to do our comms, we're looking to make sure that our residents understand, we'll be really clear about what is acceptable and what isn't acceptable. So a little bit about the process. Just a point to note that the launch of voter ID in Wales, I think it could be termed a soft launch, so there hasn't been a large amount of publicity around this. I think the aim is for the England local authorities to be supported, and there's advertising going on there. I don't know if anybody has Sky TV. I've seen it on there, I heard it on the radio a little bit when I've been outside Wales, but I think largely in Wales there's, you know, a step back, and nobody's going to do any publication with the aim of helping those English authorities get through their first poll with the ID. It does help us because we can see some of the lessons learned, and we'll be able to understand, you know, maybe some of the pitfalls, some of the things we need to watch. So the applicant largely is expected to go to the register2vote.gov.uk portal to apply. So it's a digital application, the same way as people can apply to get onto the electoral register. And I think there's also bringing in some changes that when people apply to get on the electoral register, it will then take them straight through to that portal. So they're almost doubling up and getting both things that they need at the same time. So when that comes in to the online application, it then goes through to be verified through some cross matches, the DWP, the electoral registration system. So there are some security measures for verification that sit underneath that. However, for some residents, it's appreciated that, you know, doing a digital application is not going to be suitable. So there is supported application for what we would hope would be, you know, smaller numbers of people, but they would be supported in person. So, you know, even as far as we'd be able to take photographs of them. And then the officers would be the people basically doing the same application for them in the same portal. So again, that will go through the verification. After the central verification, it does come through to local electoral teams. So a team in Newport will be looking at this, and then they would be applying the final checks essentially and making sure that that application is valid and could go forward. If there are items missing, if more information is needed, for example, proof of address, those kind of things, the team would go back to the applicant on a local basis and try and get that information to get that application over the line. Once the application has been signed off as valid, it then goes back to a central fulfilment centre. So it's a UK-wide fulfilment centre. I think at some stage there may be some measures introduced where local authorities can choose to fulfil locally or outsource, whatever option might be best for them. But at the moment it is all through a centralised print and mail, and then it gets posted out to the address listed for that person on their electoral register. So in some very exceptional circumstances, they may be able to pick up a printed copy here at the Civic Centre, but that would be very exceptional, and obviously that would be managed through the process itself. The voter ID or VAC is an A4 document, and it has inherent built-in security features, a bit like, you know, passport or money. So it has some features built into the paper so that it will prevent fraud and will prevent being able to be duplicated. I think at the end of January, some application figures looked like there were just under 7,000 applications in England at that time, but, you know, bearing in mind they'd only been open for 2 weeks at that point. And I think Wales and Scotland were almost on par with about 100 applications each. I think we've done about 6 in Newport so far, and that's mostly our team, if I'm honest, just testing it out and trying to make sure that we understand the system, we can see it follow through and everything was working okay for us. So we would anticipate after the May polls for England, we would have a clear communication plan in place to make sure that residents are aware. We would try to manage that demand between now and when we would expect the next polls to be in May 2024. You know, the challenge I think might be, you know, you're going to, as with anything electoral wise, you're going to get a big peak in demand at a certain point in time. It's going to add pressure to an already pressurised time, and we want to really try and push people to go through the process on a steadier, more manageable volume. So the Electoral Commission is running the National Public Communications Campaign to raise awareness of the requirement to show ID and remind the public to bring their ID with them when they vote. And they are also supporting those without eligible identification documents to understand how and when they can apply for one. So there will be materials that as a local authority we will be able to share through social media channels. So there's lots of centralised tools and materials that we can use ourselves. We'll be able to do mail shots with that to increase awareness. And as I said, the always approach agreed through the Electoral Commission is that there's no real specific communication until later in the year, the aim being not to accuse electors when there is England specific communications going on, and also to make sure that that fulfilment can be met in the central print and mail. So just worth noting a few things then that will be different in the polling stations with voter ID. So polling stations will be required to have a private area for the elector to produce ID in private if requested. So this can be achieved in a variety of ways and will depend on the room or rooms available in the polling stations. This could be privacy screens, could be partitions, separate rooms and annex, but we'll be working through our existing list of polling stations and analysing how that will work in each one. It may be the case that in some areas we'd be looking to perhaps think about different polling stations if it doesn't meet our requirements. When I'm thinking about this, it's also thinking about the accessibility side of it as well, which I will come back and talk to the committee about a bit more. Funding will be provided for privacy screens or to repurpose existing screens. For example, there might be some COVID-19 kit that we've used in the past that we could reuse and look at that. Nobody apart from the presiding officer and the poll clerk may inspect the document unless permitted by the elector. And then key to note is the presiding officer must refuse to give an elector a ballot paper if they either don't have the photographic ID, an acceptable form of, or if they have reasonable doubt that the photographic ID doesn't look like the elector, or if they reasonably suspect the documents to be forged. So only the presiding officer can make that final decision. And if the poll clerk has reasonable doubt, they must be deferred to that officer to make the decision. So as you can imagine, there's going to be a considerable amount of extra training that we will need to give our staff in the stations. This is brand new for them as much as it is for the voters. And I think the challenge is going to be around making sure that message is getting through to the electorate so that they're not turning up on the day without a form of ID and expecting to be able to vote. And also making sure that our staff feel supported and they feel able to make the right decisions at the right time. Refusal to deliver the ballot paper is final, and obviously, you know, as with elections in general, that could be subject to review then on an election petition following elections. So again, really key that this training is absolutely watertight and we make sure that our experienced officers are supported to manage those poll stations on the day. So I think you've already touched on some of the challenges that this brings, but you know, the key one is around raising awareness. So we need to make sure that we give sufficient lead time to our voters to make sure, you know, number one, we want them to be on the electoral register, we want them to be able to vote, but just as importantly now we want to make sure that they understand that they're going to need photographic ID and give them the opportunity to apply for it if they haven't got it already. There is information available on the Electoral Commission website, which I've got a link to that at the end of the presentation, so people can sign up to it, have a regular update email, so that's really helpful. There is one as well, specific as well. And the Electoral Commission has already done some research to identify groups which may be more likely to face significant or compounding barriers in having or accessing suitable voter ID. So I think we need to do work with our equalities team, our partners, to make sure that we are targeting some of that comms and awareness raising to make sure that those groups are included in being able to vote and there's not any further disenfranchisement. We talked a little bit about, you know, capacity and resilience of the teams, the new requirements for the poll station staff and that additional pressure and an already really pressurised time. There is some funding that's available through the Department of Levelling Up Housing and Community, so it's looking at some of these issues, but I think this will be new burden of funding. So whilst there will be an acceptance that, you know, this is new legislation being brought in and there will be support for that, at some point that extra support will cease, and we need to look at if that is creating a pressure in terms of financials. At the moment, the grant that we've had through has been specifically around equipment. So thinking about, do we need to be able to take photographs of people coming in for their photo ID? And then the other part of it really is around the privacy and the accessibility, which I'm not going to go on to today, but we will talk about that again at a further date. So further funding is expected in April this year and April next year. I think some of that has already been pushed through for the England authorities because obviously they're dealing with it at a different pace than we are. And I think there's also some opportunity for local authorities to make justification-led bids. And we're waiting on some of the terms of how we might be able to put that together and what we can apply for. And then a last slide is just that link to photo ID information in the Electoral Commission. It's really helpful and interesting studies, data, and also they pull together what's being looked at from England's perspective. And we were able to view that journey as they're going on. It really nice. That was my presentation.
Okay, so I'll open it up now to members. Does anybody want to ask any questions, make any points? Emma?
I was just wondering, how many cases of electoral fraud have we had in Newport, say, the last 3 years or 5 years?
I know the last national figures published were 2018. I think there's something like 266.
What, in Newport specifically?
No, in the UK.
In the whole of the
UK?
yeah.
In the whole of the UK is 266. I think there were 3 convictions, but I don't think any of those were for personation. They were for the types of
like postal votes.
Yeah, I don't think there's any. There weren't last time because I was in that election, but I don't think there were any in the years before.
Anybody else want to make any points? Phil?
I suppose in the unlikely scenario, a snap general election, what a putting provision on, and roughly how long do you think it would take? Say they call a general election for 4th of May.
I think if there was a snap election, we wouldn't have a lot of notice. But that is part of our risk assessment. That is a concern, and we need to, be mindful of that. So we have planned out for that and are taking steps accordingly to, if it happened, yes, it would be, pulling out all stops and trying to get it done. But yeah, we are trying to manage the risk in a pragmatic way.
I don't think there's too much to worry about.
Anybody else want to?
Number of questions really. Is the photograph going to be the same quality required for passports?
That's an interesting question. It's not quite the same. And there are some set procedures that we need to be mindful of, and some of it's around details such as how pixelated the photo is. So when you change the size of it,
is the fact that I've done my passport online and I found it very difficult because you're not allowed to wear glasses. So it's take the glasses off and press the button straight away if you get the right button. This is what concerns me. That's one issue.
I think the key requirement is that photo needs to look like that person, and you need to be able to identify them. That's the most important thing. So for this one, I don't think it's quite as stringent as the passport photos.
Right. Okay. So the other thing is that individuals have to do it online. So therefore, they must have an email address. Why not email a certificate to them rather than them being cased post?
I think I'm not 100% sure. I think that would be part of the security measures to make sure that electoral address registered for that person, that's where the ID is going to, and you need to be able to have it portable and show in the polling station. I'm assuming.
And it's going to be a paper document then?
It is, yeah.
What about replacement of those documents?
So there are some rules around replacements. I think one of the challenges for us as an electoral team will be when we're very close to the polling day. So there's not going to be room or lead time enough to be able to get that centrally fulfilled. And I think what we will end up doing is having to do a significant amount of additional support for that in the lead up to the poll. So there are already some tight rules in place around how near to an election you can sign to the electoral register and get ballot paper, but then this would be incorporated as part of those rules.
So is the individual electorate going to receive this certificate months in advance?
If they apply for it months in advance, yes. Yeah, they could apply for it now if they wish to. It's available now.
The other thing is, could we have a copy of the slides, please?
Yes, of course.
And I think, Chair, this is one of the extra meetings that possibly the residents at Newport would want in regards to the board meetings.
Good point. Absolutely, good point.
That's all I have. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Emma?
Sorry, to kind of pioneer with what Phil said, the deadline to apply is 5 PM, 6 working days before a poll. So effectively, elections on a Thursday, it's the Wednesday of the week before. Do you know if any testing has been done around the resilience of the DWP to be able to like do all that verification if there's a sudden, say, like a snap general election, if there's a sudden influx of people? I mean,
I don't know, but I very much hope so.
I do too.
And I think this is, you know, we all hope that all the due diligence and everything's been tested through. But I think England having local polls will, shine a light on anything that perhaps is
Sure.
to measure in time for us.
I just have 2 questions for you, and I'll continue then, Kate. The first one is somebody turns up at the Civic Centre, wishes to be able to vote, but lives in a rented property, doesn't have any identification at all. How do you verify who they are to allow them to vote?
First of all, they have to be on the electoral register. So are we talking about voter ID or
Anybody can get on that.
Yeah.
So, but how do you register? How do you give no identification, no photograph, nothing? How do you verify?
Test me now. This is the detail. I think you have to provide proof of address, proof of ID to be on the electoral register, and there are some verification processes similar to this, but it's tied into national databases.
Yeah, but the problem with the one to go on to register is the reason this is that is open to fraud, because anybody can produce something to say I'm John Smith. How do you prove that's John Smith to issue them with a certificate to vote?
Well, it's the same. It's national verification process, isn't it, for the electoral register?
So there's no difference really, is it?
What, from the voter ID to this?
Yeah, so because you can't, how do you decide that that's that person? They're on the register, but you don't know it's that person. They've got no voter, they've got no photograph, they don't have a driving license.
Oh, in terms of the
Yeah,
measure of the.
yeah, they don't have a passport. You've got nothing.
I think in terms of the photo itself, you can apply online, and the photo itself isn't verified, but the verification process is that person, national insurance numbers, dates of birth, addresses, those kind of things.
But thinking back to Trevor's point, really, which is if you want a passport, you have to go down to Sainsbury's, for example. You go in the photo booth, you get a link number, go on a computer, you pop it in, and there you pop up. That would have been a far better system to have done it than to have done it this way, I think. But because that would have taken the onus off you, because there would have been a direct link into national government there to identify somebody as that person.
Yeah, I think, the challenge is, it is national legislation, and you have to work with the context of that. I think, as I say, the test will be helpful for us, will be the English polls, and we'll be able to get some good data from those to work from.
And then just finally, do you think that having a different system for local government and police crime commissioner, which often falls on the same day as local government, who's going to marry that up? Because the fact is, I want to vote both. I've got ID. I haven't got ID because I don't need to bring in local government, but I've got to have ID to vote for the police and crime
or
commission.
even a by-election, by-election.
So how do we marry that then? Surely we need to have the same system for the whole lot.
I think, again, as electoral administrators, our role is to implement the legislation for that poll and that country at the moment. So, that is what it is. But yes, I certainly appreciate the challenge, especially of divergence, where, when I come back to talk about postal votes, there can be a number of different concurrent processes.
I get that, but the key thing is that the police and crime commissioner and local government on the same day. You have, or we will have, 2 different systems of voting for those 2 elections. So I can go to the polling station with no ID and vote for local government, but then I can't vote for the Police and Crime Commissioner because I haven't got any ID on me.
I think some of those concerns have been fed back in consultations and from some of the Electoral Commission, Association of Electoral Administrators. So where there's been consultation on some of the developments, and it certainly looks like there'll be more to come around modernising elections. So yeah, some of those challenges have been fed back, and I come back to, you know, as administrators, we'll be tasked with implementing the legislation that comes out of that.
I think that's a recipe for disaster, but there we are.
Chair, can I trip up in just on that point there? Yeah. Obviously, our recourse on this is the political parties. It isn't by making appointments to an administrator here in Newport, so that there are routes for us to complain about this, but it wouldn't be through this committee, with due respect, or through our administrators who can only do their best with a system I don't think any of us particularly wanted.
Yeah, but I think with our administrators here have to make the point to the Welsh Government that we can't have two different systems of voting. We all either need to be on the same system, and they need to step up and accept that this is what's come forward. You might not like it, but it's there.
But the Welsh Assembly has decided, or Senate has decided, we don't need it for Welsh council elections, but they don't have the power for the Police and Crime Commission. You can only take that back to the national government.
Yeah, but at the end of the day, the Welsh Government need to make their mind up about how they're going to do it. So they either need to step on board, or they need to ask for permission to have powers to manage the Police and Crime Commissioner. And if they don't get those, and they haven't got those powers, so they need to step on board with this. That's their only option. Otherwise, they're going to cause confusion and problems. And you'll have people at the polling station that can vote for one and can't vote for the other.
Or where they have deemed it appropriate, they have passed the legislation. So most people, I think, would be content with this system.
Let's hope so.
You know, as councillors, we've all been through this process of being elected. I'm sure that none of us would want to see anything to deter our electors from actually coming out and expressing an opinion on the day, even if we don't necessarily agree with it at the time. But is there a process in place which is going to, you know, be able to establish if this is actually deterring people from voting? Are we going to be recording? We're obviously recording the percentage of votes. Is there going to be a mechanism for feeding that back in? Are the government interested to know the impact on the voter turnout?
I think it would be fair to say that there's, you know, lots of the Electoral Commission, lots of documented discussion and challenges from lots of groups really on whether this will deter any of our voters and whether there be further disenfranchisement. I think that is something that will become under quite intense scrutiny, certainly through England polls. It would be something again to come back and look at and see what they determine the outcome to be. I think it's a tricky one to measure, because you can measure how many people have turned out for a poll. Yeah, so it would be interesting to see what they do with it.
And I suppose they'll have some indication of motivation by the number of people who actually go through this process and register.
Yeah.
But will they be looking the right way around? This is a bit looking at the holes around the edge, isn't it? Or in the middle? Are they going to be, you know, that's needed to really identify perhaps particular demographics in our communities who aren't being deferred from, you know, if you just one step too far.
And it's difficult, isn't it? Because voting is a private act, and you know, we don't want to know any further information about voters. However, yeah, it will be difficult to measure that impact, and I'd be interested to see the Electoral Commission to analyse any impacts afterwards.
Are there any other questions or points?
Just crossed my mind, Chair. Postal votes. How do they verify somebody with a certificate because there's no photo ID on a postal vote? Or are they going to be?
Postal votes, there is still a process, but people can opt out and have a postal vote rather than in person. You need the in-person, the voter ID, to have a ballot paper in a polling station. So that on that day is to make sure that the person turning up for that ballot paper is who they say they are with a form of photo ID.
So I'm currently having a postal vote. So will I get a postal vote or will I have to go to the polling station every time?
You would still have a postal vote, however, which we'll come back and talk to you a bit more about, you may need to refresh the signature on your postal vote more frequently than you are doing now.
But how do you identify the individual filling out that postal vote?
It's the same verification process for postal votes that's been in place for some time. That's not changing. It is literally just the bit where you go into the ballot at the poll station to get your ballot paper.
So there's no identification if you've got to transfer from the certificate, the voting ID certificate to postal vote.
No, the voting ID certificate is separate.
Right.
So it's
That's
all
only
you
go
do
to the
to verify yourself when you go into the polling station.
I think we're missing the point here. I think what Trevor's trying to say is, that's a postal vote, or he applies then for the postal vote. But apart from him filling in an application to have a postal vote, there is no other verification to suggest he is who he is. So will he have to go online, fill a form in, download a photograph, send all that in to you to get that postal vote? Or will you just issue that postal vote anyway on the fact that he's filled an application in online?
The verification for applications for postal votes remains the same.
So there's no
So if everybody goes on a postal vote,
Yeah.
then there's no point in having this.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yes, exactly. And I do seem to recall from previous elections, allegations of fraud have been focused on postal votes.
Yeah.
So the government's done nothing to address that.
None of the voter ID changes address that. There are some other changes around postal votes, which I will come back and do as part of another variant, I think. But you don't need a voter ID to postal vote.
So we'll just all register.
Because that was identifying it.
Sorry.
So we'll all just register for postal votes.
I think we had a massive upturn in postal vote applications during the pandemic, and that's steadily increased year on year. So interesting to see.
You have to go for all the rigmarole.
Do you know, so 2020 elections, 2021 wasn't it, Senate elections? So will those postal voters have a 5-year postal vote, or will that expire now next year?
So,
So
I think now I'm on my head.
That's devolved.
There will be two concurrent
Yes,
postal vote
it's
applications.
still,
There will be two separate postal vote applications in all likelihood.
so if you've already got a 5-year one, you're all right until it expires, kind of.
I think it starts from rolling from November this year onwards. The 3-year thing comes in from then onwards, I want to say, but I would have to check that because it's a lot. It's a lot.
I know, I don't envy you.
I think it is a rolling one from November. But I'll check that.
Seems to me there's an awful lot in here, but they've missed a crucial thing about the postal votes,
Yeah, they have.
which is extraordinary.
So everyone goes for a postal vote, there's no need to have any.
It goes through these groups.
Now, would it be that if you have a postal vote, because the council and the Welsh Assembly elections are devolved and therefore this doesn't apply to them, are those postal votes valid for 5 years, or are they valid for 3 years as per that new legislation for general elections and primary?
In all likelihood, I anticipate that there will probably be two separate application processes for postal votes for different elections.
Well, this is crazy because it's going to cause confusion.
And there's many involved.
And yeah, absolute confusion.
It's confused already.
I think perhaps if I come back next time, talk about the postal vote side of
I
it.
think we need to come back on this again.
Regular conversation, definitely.
The accessibility side of it is really important, so we'll talk about that a bit more, and really like the comms plan around supporting residents to understand.
Sorry again. Could we also find out? So sometimes when we're all out canvassing, we'll say postal vote forms and envelopes. We're going to register postal vote. What constraints will there be around candidates supporting people to apply for the VAT as well?
There are some significant changes around that, so I'll come back and talk about those.
Thanks.
Chair, just as we're getting all the awkward.
Excuse me, Chair.
It's my understanding that itinerants will vote.
Sorry?
It's my understanding that itinerants will vote, and they won't necessarily have an address, but they may have a formal identification.
There are already measures in place that support people that may be homeless, so that wouldn't be a change.
Get postal vote.
For me, I think that somebody from here needs to write to both the British government and the Welsh government and really ask them both to sit down and talk about this properly and get that act together, because we've got two different systems on how you can vote, what you need to vote, and the length of time that you can have a postal vote for. And it's just going to cause confusion, and confusion then discourages people from voting, because they just think, well, I can't be bothered with all that nonsense, I'm not going to do it.
Electoral administrators, we have taken part in all the consultations. There was one that was fed back the 10th of January, I think, around further changes that may be made. We are part of all the discussions with the Electoral Commission, the Association of Electoral Administrators are professional people, but there are some of these issues that you're raising that are more political rather than operational and administrative.
Who has developed the guidance? Who has developed the guidelines on this? Is it the Electoral Commission, or are they really just super consultees in this process?
They are stakeholders and consultees. The legislation itself is the Department of Levelling Up, Housing and Communities, the LUHC. That's what it is.
Well, it's not very levelling. I think that's my conclusion. Yes.
I would still like a copy of the slides if I may, just to go through in a second.
I just can't wait for this to go to council.
Be a long time, I think it's
Yeah,
Yeah, I just think that every member should have a copy of this, and people should be aware of it. And as Trevor has said, we should be part of that's one of the meetings to people to sort of digest what's going on, and
Perhaps some more member training closer to, towards the end of the year would be good.
it is confusing, and it's just two different systems for the point of having two different systems. There's no need of it. Either we don't do it in Wales altogether, or the Welsh government buy into it and put it on place.
Due respect, Chair, I think we'd have to disagree with you. Quite content with the Welsh system.
Well, that's what I mean. Either we just have the Welsh system, or
As long as it's
Well, yeah.
we have to take it on, there's no problem.
that's what it has to be. But at the moment, we've now got two very different systems with complications.
Well, I think they should be concerned in Wales, because I believe it was very unfortunate that an area of Newport had the lowest interest from the voting population of any area anywhere, I think, when the recent Parliament Commissioner was held. So, I mean, it's not in anybody's interest to have any system that discourages people from voting.
Yeah, and would you be able to find out if, I'm assuming some research has been done into, whether not needing ID for locals in Wales and needing a mixed election would impact on voting? Do you think you'd be able to have a look to dig anything in?
Yeah, I'm not sure I've seen anything specifically on diversion issue, but there is lots on how might this impact groups, and there is some research that's been commissioned on that.
That would be really helpful, I think, for all of us. Thank you.
Okay, have we finished on this topic for today?
For today.
Okay, can we move on then to member training, please? Pages 9 to 40.
Again, apologies.
Okay.
So this is an information only paper just to inform the committee on the implementation of the induction curriculum so far for members and levels of attendance at training since May 2022. So under the Council's Constitution, this committee is required to ensure that members have access to a reasonable level of training and development. Last year, we looked at the draft induction curriculum set by the WLGA to support our members following the local elections, and that was considered by the committee. A final draft of the curriculum was then shared with the committee in February 2022. That initial training and support was intended to help councillors into their new role and to meet those challenges, particularly for newer members that might be looking at their first term as an elected member. So we focused on essential training, then moving on to essential legislation, services and duties to increase knowledge and help people to fulfil their duties effectively. Committee members are asked to consider the delivery and the uptake of training. We have a number of sessions planned to complete that first year up until the May this year, and then consider what we would be looking at for further training and members in the following year. So the direct curriculum for Newport focused on some key principles. So this was around less is more. There's a huge amount of information to cover, as I'm sure you have an understanding of. We're trying to make sure that the right information was provided at the right time so that there was support, but it wasn't overwhelming. And the development activities were intended to be member centred, so thinking about what members needed at a particular time, what might suit them, and how that should be delivered. Supporting members to take an active role with their community and making decisions effectively. Our sessions were designed to be as interactive as possible, with plenty of opportunities for discussion and scenarios to work through understanding of the information shared, and on an as and when basis. So again, thinking about particular members' roles, whether they were members of scrutinies, whether they were members of planning, licensing committees, and trying to support them with sessions tailored to their particular needs. We also try to draw in as much expertise as possible, so often this is with officers who have professional disciplines within their area, but we've also sourced external trainers and facilitators to make sure that the best support possible is provided with the right knowledge. Whilst we did have an agreed framework for the year, it was a little bit flexible, so where things arose that we needed to fit in and move things around, that was done on an ad hoc basis. Particularly thinking about the dates around, the poll day last year and the AGM was very tight, so a lot of that focus in the first couple of weeks was on making sure members had their kit, the right team was available, they were able to dial into meetings and able to participate from the earliest possible point. Following that initial support and making sure people understood code of conduct and were able to attend meetings, we moved on to the key legislation, so things that underpin decision making in Wales and that elected members need to be mindful of. And there were bespoke sessions scheduled for quasi-judicial committees like planning and licensing. In the summer and autumn, we moved on to introductions or refreshers on other key legislation and policy support, including Qualities Act and safeguarding. We also introduced some sessions that were focused on service areas like housing, public protection and the environment, so that it would help members support their residents in some of the most frequently asked queries that they have. Then thinking back to just before Christmas, with the budget setting process imminent, the focus then moved on to be around finance and treasury management, ready for the process that we're just coming to the end of now. There were also some webinars which were scheduled by the Local Government Association on supporting councillors with abuse and intimidation and personal safety. There were some very short online cybersecurity sessions sent straight to members' email inboxes on password security and phishing. The last point of access was our e-learning modules, which are available through the internet. They have a variety of subjects available there. So then summary of the training by quarter has been included, so that has been dated there. Most of those sessions posted and delivered by the council and recorded on Teams. I think there were a couple of sessions that we weren't able to record because of technical issues, but they were all in a folder. So if anybody needed to go back and have a refresher, they are available, including slides. There's also some guides in that folder. So with the WLGA, there's some really good information and support on personal security is a good one, or social media. Those are saved in the Teams folder as well. We have done some informal drop-in sessions for members over the last few months to help with any IT, communication or technology issues. And then I want to draw your attention to the chart which shows attendance.
Page 12.
Yeah, attendance, the sessions that have been supported. So code of conduct training is at the top there. That is considered a mandatory module for all members to complete. Almost 90% of our councillors have attended one of the 2 training sessions that have been put on, and there is a final one which is due 2nd of March. So that is the last sessions available to councillors to attend to complete the code of conduct training before we would be going back to standards committee to report to them as part of their terms of reference. The council's climate change plan places importance on considering positive action as part of every decision concerning tackling climate change. So a programme of training was developed for elected members to think about individual contribution to carbon, becoming carbon zero. We are aiming for all elected members to have attended the training within the first year following elections. So this attendance, which is about 18%, is up to the end of December, but we have got another session which is just taking place in February, and there should be a further date to be shared with members soon. There wasn't a huge amount of take-up on the e-learning modules during this period, so 4 units of the training were completed independently by members. So there are still some commitments that the committee put in place last year that we've still to deliver before the end of May. So those are focused on sharing skills, sharing skills, financial scrutiny, social care and wellbeing, data management and FOI, including general data protection regulations. We'll do some more on social media and the use of social media, and bring in some more service areas to talk about their particular services for the public. We've also got then, on top of the initial training curriculum, some additional sessions planned for the following year. So violence against women, domestic abuse, sexual violence. I think we've got a date in for early March for that one. As I said, further carbon literacy. WLGA leadership programme is ongoing, and we'll look to have some more drop-in support sessions for IT members. So I think it would be a bit onerous to ask members to give us feedback on every single training session, and I think people would stop responding to that pretty quickly. They get a bit of fatigue for it. But I think perhaps at this point, I'd be interested to know if the committee would feel like a general survey on training and reduction so far, how people have found it, what's worked, what's not worked, and then maybe perhaps suggest some topics for the next year too. So that is my update. Committee is asked to note the report and approve the development of an all-member survey and capturing feedback going forward, please.
I just ask you, Liz, on this. Licensing and planning. I thought that they were compulsory for members on those committees because of the legal implications that move forward. And yet, although there are small numbers of members on both of those committees, licensing is at just over 50%.
Yeah.
And planning is at just over 70%. Considering the numbers of members are small, shouldn't both those committees, for those members to function on those committees, be at both at 100%?
I'm not aware. I mean, I haven't been notified of anybody who's sitting on what the committee does. Yeah, who hasn't done the training on it. It obviously seems very important. So could we have a check on that, please?
Or is it just that this is a chart of all 51 members?
Yeah.
And the,
Yeah.
That's what I took it. There's nobody on my committee that hasn't had the training.
you need to look at that, I think.
Yeah.
It is overall a 51 member chart, but those two sections have looked at just who's on the planning and licensing committee, so they are out of the total, but I will go back and check on
Thank you. Maybe you be considered notifying the chairs of the committees who hasn't done the training. Isn't he?
You have to sit on those committees.
I did. Oh, I'm sorry. Go on.
No, I was just wondering, it says 6 members haven't done the code of conduct training yet. Are they all registered on the next course in March?
As I remember, we are, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
I think so.
Thank you. Sorry, Kate.
Sorry, that's on that. Sorry.
Yeah.
Could we just send them a reminder that they have 6 members? When someone is.
I think they know by their group whip.
Yeah.
Those of us that have.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah.
No comment.
Yeah.
Yeah, I did have an idea, a suggestion about this training, which I haven't, I don't know whether it's actually drifted the question yet. I'm sure we're all getting an unprecedented number of applications or requests to us as councillors, really to advocate for our constituents in housing options. Obviously, I certainly inform everybody who writes to me that I'm not. We are not allowed to advocate for them as individuals. However, I would actually like to understand better how that housing option schemes works. And although it's very interesting, the session that we had on from housing services, it didn't touch on housing options, and I really feel that to be able to give the best advice to people, I would like some sort of training actually on housing options. It would have been really handy to have 10 years ago, I think.
Yeah, I think that has been raised with me actually.
Right,
so I know that the initial session was a good overview of housing services in general and
the housing situation, but we need to know how to advise people to go through it.
Anybody else want to make any comments? No?
The sampling trade, that was the one that's never been successful, but it's got a very low take up.
I think the first cohort wasn't a huge amount of notice, and although we got it filled, there were external officers and members at that one, because officers are going through the training as well. The second one, they added to 15 places because of the nature of the training. So I think when the invitation goes out, it's a first come, first served, and then once it's full kind of thing. So we would look to get a couple more sessions on to facilitate everybody attending.
Anybody else? Okay, we'll move on from that then. And the next then is update on appointment to Regional Scrutiny Committee, the Gwent Public Service Board, pages 15 to 16. Is that you again?
Me, sorry. This one is an information update for the committee on appointments to the Regional Scrutiny Committee for the Gwent Public Services Board. So this is to inform you concerning the arrangements regarding the Regional Scrutiny Committee, and that Scrutiny Committee will look at the work of the Gwent Public Services Board and the Section 35 of the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act 2015. So in November last year, Partnerships Scrutiny Committee resolved to recommend the terms of reference for that new regional scrutiny and for 2 representatives to be agreed through full council. So this report provides further details on the arrangements and procedural arrangements for appointing those representatives. So the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act came into force in April 2016, aimed at improving social, economic, environmental and cultural wellbeing of Wales. It's designed to support and deliver a public service that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. Council must consider the Act and everything it does, and appended to the report is a report that was prepared by the Blaenau Gwent County Borough Council, presented to the Gwent PSB back in September last year, and this sets out the direction of travel towards a regional scrutiny committee that looks at the work of the Gwent PSB. The Gwent PSB accepted all the recommendations in the report, and the scrutiny officers in the 5 constituent authorities are taking those recommendations forward with a view to that regional scrutiny having their first meeting in April this year. So Performance Scrutiny Committee for Partnerships resolved to recommend the terms of reference and for 2 reps from Newport City Council to be appointed to that board. The Regional Scrutiny Committee will have an equal number of elected members from each appointing local authority, none of which will be executive cabinet members, and those will be appointed in accordance with each council's local arrangements. Under our constitution, this reflects Article 4.2 of Part 2. So appointing representatives to outside bodies is a function of full council unless the appointment is an executive function or must be delegated by council. Reflecting the political majority in Newport, this will be 2 Labour representatives, and they will be determined at council meeting next week on the 28th of February. The committee is therefore asked to receive and note the development of the Regional Scrutiny Committee. And the constitutional arrangements will need to be amended to reflect the discharge of the scrutiny function through a regional joint committee. So this will be considered under the terms of reference of this committee, and will make recommendations as necessary to Cabinet or Council concerning the Council's corporate governance and decision-making processes, the terms of the Council's constitution.
Everybody happy with that? So it's just we've been following the recommendations from the partnerships, the performance scrutiny, that 2 members be appointed on this council to sit on the partnership board, and then for those 2 members to report back, I assume, to the performance scrutiny committee what's going on. And it will be served by council next week, and it will be 2 Labour members. Agreed? Yeah, fine, thank you. Good. So the date of the next meeting then is the 27th of April at 10 AM. Everybody happy with that?
If you want to talk a little bit about things coming along on the forward work programme.
Yes, I do. Yeah. I think we should have a look at the forward work programme. There's some things on there that we want to have a look at.
So we've already mentioned in the last report about updating the constitution to reflect the regional scrutiny arrangements. So that's something we should bring to the next meeting. And also looking at, there were some queries around standing orders raised in council last month.
Yeah.
So that'll be brought to the next meeting too. There's something like standards committee, apologies, Chair, break it down. No,
nothing standards committee.
So that would be probably the next meeting, and I could bring back one of the things we talked about today around legislation around elections and some of the further updates.
Councillor Stelly wanted to bring forward the questions to the leader.
Standing order.
Yeah. Standing orders. And the other thing under standing orders, of course, is nothing too controversial, would be that the last council that the deputy leader didn't standing properly, for example, for the leader, and whether that should be happening, or whether we run a system that they run in Parliament where if the deputy leader is running the council that day, that it's the deputy leader from the opposition that takes questions or whatever, asks questions.
Could it's the extract from the Constitution on that. So
I don't think there is anything in there.
So that's why we need to update it, put something in it. So we'll forward an amendment to this committee, which will then be good to book.
And then the following meeting, I thought it would be helpful perhaps to bring an update on the first year of the participation strategy. So this was something that the committee introduced last year, and then went through full council. So perhaps talk about what's progressed into that, and if we want to make any further amendments or changes. I would also like to bring back, thinking about the big changes we've been talking around electoral administration today. Part of my remit is to make sure that the team is set up to manage that capacity and be resilient. So perhaps come back to talk about some of the changes within my service.
I think that needs to be done on a regular basis until we get the initial sitting.
We need to look at whether there's adequate staff in place to be able to deliver these new changes and the processes that are going forward. That's absolutely key.
Whether you're having any difficulty finding the different locations.
For polling stations.
Polling stations.
I think that's probably the next 2 meetings.
Okay, that's good. Is there anything that the members would like to bring forward? It's your committee, so don't have to say now, but you want to think about something that you feel that ought to come forward. You have a right to refer things into this committee to forward. It's up to you. Might be something that burning somewhere that you've not really thought about, but
The only thing that's been raised is the training online. Some members obviously got other commitments. Nothing to do and they find it very difficult to go through training sessions. So whether those training modules can be put online so they can actually attend those. Even the reading skill, if they can take part, not necessarily take part, but they can refer to the questions which are being asked.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, and I know we try and draw some of this out in the survey that we'll do, but Liz and I have talked about, you know, turning some of the modules into e-learning. So the code of conduct would be a really good one. 5 years is a long time. People wanted to have a bit of a refresher on it in between, being able to access that, you know, when we said your leisure would be helpful, I think. Yeah, it's a good point.
Okay, anything else? Well, like debate, like debate. Okay, thank you all very much indeed for coming, and I'll see you on the 27th of April. Well, see you all next week, no doubt. So, robust debate.